when you started the book, this Empire book, was there much of an overlap between your research for Star Wars and your research for Empire? Because obviously there was an overlap in the production of the two films as well.
No, in terms of the writing, there really wasn't any overlap. Because there's, but when I'm finished and wrap the book, it takes them, anywhere from 6 to 9 months to print it. And we didn't know whether we were doing an Empire book, until the Star Wars book sold well.
Yeah.
So there was probably almost a year between the two. And the same will be true for Empire and Jedi, if we do a Jedi book.
Yeah. Did you realise it was going to be such a mammoth task? Because it took you about 18 months, didn't it, all told, to put the book together?
It actually took 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And, I knew that's the problem with these books. I know how much work it's going to be. It's just basically, almost every morning and every weekend for about 2 years.
Yeah. And that's alongside all your other commitments that you've got as well.
Right, and then sometimes there's downtime when I'm doing something or I'm waiting for Random House to get back to me, and I've gotten pretty fast. So in the downtime, I wrote the Indiana Jones young adult novel, and then also The Sounds of Star Wars.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've gotten, I guess it seems pretty fast. But I also had to put my older daughter through college, so.
Of course. You were, well, was it a blessing or a curse in the fact that there was already a making of Empire Strikes Back, Once Upon a Galaxy? Was that of much use to you? And was there stuff that Alan Arnold compiled that wasn't used in that original book that was handy for you to do this one?
Well, the work that Alan Arnold did was invaluable. And, at first I wasn't sure, because I read that book a long time ago, and I wasn't sure, how much of his story I just have to repeat, and I just didn't really remember. So I read through his book, and his book is great, but a lot of it is sort of very, not subjective, but it's his experience going through it, and I didn't think that really had any place in a more objective story.
Yeah.
And but a lot of it, I did quote in my book when I thought it was, the right place and time for it.
Yeah.
But also what happened was I met in the archives Don Dees, who was an early archivist at Lucasfilm and later worked on the prequel trilogy, and he said, when I was an archivist, I found Alan Arnold's original tapes.
Okay.
And would you be interested in those? Because, somebody was accidentally threw them away, so I just took them and conserved them.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, of course. Work them over. And so he gave them to the Skywalker Ranch Research Library, and we had them all retranscribed. Because the original transcriptions were helter-skelter, and were missing parts, and then the original manuscript had been heavily edited. So I was able to go back to the original transcripts and the original tapes, and of course there was lots of stuff that he either wasn't able to use for various reasons or they just didn't have space for. And so you get a more authentic recording in the new Empire book, in some cases anyway, than perhaps in the older book.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because Alan's book, obviously he was on set when they made Empire as they were doing it, so it's more it's like a diary almost, isn't it? Not just a making of. Whereas your books stand back a little bit more and look at the big picture. Do you think that gives you an advantage? I know with the benefit of hindsight, you can look back at everything. Do you think that makes for an easier book to write or a more difficult book to write, given that there's that time that's passed?
It's definitely more difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I did the diary approach in episode 3, but unlike Alan Arnold, I was able to start at the very beginning and go, almost up to the end. But Alan Arnold was brought in basically, when they were about to go to Norway.
Yeah.
And he had almost nobody had experience in those kind of big budget special effects movies that time, because Empire was essentially the third or fourth of that kind after 2001 and Star Wars. So nobody knew about that stuff, and he wrote about what he knew about, and he did a great job.
Yeah.
But then for this book, I wanted to put in obviously all the pre-production and all the post-production and as much marketing as I could fit in. But it's a lot more research. Although standing around on set for hours at a time waiting for something interesting to happen is also physically exhausting.
Yeah. And you did that on Sith, didn't you? So.
Yeah,
hope that the hyperspace webcam takes a picture of you.
Sorry?
Hoping that the hyperspace webcam takes a picture of you.
Well, you get so, your mind becomes so numb, you don't even think about that stuff.
Yeah.
John Knoll starts doing something funny with it or something.
Yeah. You've done a few of these making of books now. Obviously, you did the original Star Wars. You mentioned Indy. You did Sith. Do you feel that you're really getting your style down now? That to chronicle the making of a film from inception right through to release, you know, there's a way of doing it for you now. Do you feel that you've really nailed that?
Well, I don't know. You never feel like you nail it. It could always be better. You know, from the beginning, I always thought it should be an oral history because I was never crazy about people who had nothing to do with the movie sort of constantly interjecting their opinions into what was good or what was bad. I like to tell it as objectively as possible. You know, later, I'm sure people will come later who will write more subjective books and more books sort of that place the movies perhaps more in an aesthetic and critical light. But I really just wanted to tell the story of how it was done.
Yeah.
And that's what interests me. And that I guess, in and of itself is a subjective decision. But I still think the writing, you know, honestly, you could always use it one more polish. What is more satisfying with this one, as opposed to the Star Wars book, in which I started with the making of Indy, was that I laid out the book myself. So that part was really satisfying.
Yeah.
Putting all the pictures pretty much exactly where I wanted them, and the size, and it made it a lot more fun.
So you're obviously a safe pair of hands now, obviously, you know, in that respect, that you've done it before and it was a success the first time, and now it gives you more latitude yourself, I guess, as an author.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how many publishers really want you going in and doing the book map, but Random House has been very flexible at that end, and I'm going to be doing it on another book coming up. So I think it does actually end up saving them a lot of time and work, because the designer comes on and they don't have time to read the book, and they don't really know what they're looking at half the time, and it's just much easier to do it yourself.
Yeah. Now, on Empire, as a film, it was a huge step up from Star Wars, and a lot of the actors really kind of stepped up to the plate, notably Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill. Given that it's the film where Harrison really sort of stepped up and became a movie star as opposed to just a character actor, was there anything you learnt through the research that surprised you about the actors' contributions to the film?
That's a good question. Well, I guess in a way I did it backwards. I wrote about Raiders first, even though it came second.
Yeah.
I already knew that Harrison Ford was the kind of actor who really did get heavily involved in, you know, the character of his part and contributed. So I guess I wasn't surprised doing Empire, even though Empire came first. But I think, you know, actually I think what surprised me most was Mark Hamill's contribution to the film.
Mm.
And as I was writing it, just realizing how alone he was as an actor.
Yeah.
With his wife, who was pregnant at this time, and all the added pressure of working on the follow-up to, you know, the second most successful film of all time. And he's, you know, out there with a little puppet that nobody even knows really how it's going to work.
Yeah.
He's getting radio interference, and he's acting opposite this little bucket of bolts that's still not working properly. And, you know, and not having the fun of working with Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, you know, because they're off doing their scenes. So I think for him it could have been a very, very lonely experience. And, I mean, obviously had the crew supporting him, but still,
Yeah.
it was a really, really hard role, which requires the most kind of imaginative kind of acting, because he's basically not acting with anyone when he's actually doing it.
Yeah.
So, you know, even Alec Guinness, he wasn't there when he was acting to Obi-Wan. You know, he fed Alec Guinness's lines when Alec Guinness came for his, you know, half a day of work.
Yeah.
Mark Hamill did that all basically out of his imagination and working with Kirshner. Kirshner, I think, really valued Hamill's performance.
Yeah.